my name is Siren, and welcome to my channel, Records of Siren, my personal little library for storing the records of my mini crafting adventures. Today's project is probably my favorite that I've done on this channel thus far, and you've likely seen by the thumbnail, but it's going to be these hand-embroidered shorts. These are 100% done by hand, with no machine involved or any fancy tools necessary, and in my opinion, they're super cool. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started on showing you the process of how I made these. Like always, I'll put a list up on the screen of all the tools and materials I used for this project. Do note that the prices of the materials listed are meant to reflect how much one might pay for a whole new package of a material, not for the actual portion of the package being used, which is likely to be only a fraction for a project like this. Personally, I already had most of these materials left over from other crafts, so the only thing I had to purchase new was the pair of shorts I thrifted. Also, real quick, I just wanted to mention the needle threader I have written down here is optional in the tools section. While I don't usually use one, these things can be really handy if you have difficulty threading your needle. Before we get into the planning for these shorts, I want to show you the inspiration for them, which is actually this pair of pants that I made. I started embroidering these pants a little over a year ago now, but after I picked the project back up, I noticed that they don't actually fit me super well anymore. I really love the concept of the rainbow embroidery though, especially around the pockets and the holes in the denim. So I decided to have another go at it with a pair of shorts so that I could still have something very similar to my original design. So this was the pair of shorts I was working with, which were really just a basic black pair. My hope here was that the colorful embroidery floss would really stand out against the dark material. As for what I envisioned for these shorts, I went ahead and made a little sketch of them, taking into account all the details that I could, such as the belt loops, the holes, the pockets, etc. And as you can see, I went through with a colored pen to mark out all the spots that I wanted to embroider. On the front, I planned to line all the holes as well as the pockets. Then this was the same for the back. And to tie it all together, I thought it would look neat to have rainbows going up and down the very sides of the shorts where the seams are. You might notice that I left some details out. Most notably is the little card that says premium denim right here. I personally didn't like the look of it, so I just went ahead and seam ripped it out alongside with whatever was going on here with this light colored thread. The other thing I needed to do at this point was figure out which shades of floss I wanted to use. After mixing and matching for a bit, I chose these. I have no clue what brand of floss these skeins are since I wound them up onto these little plastic cards forever ago, but they're pretty glossy and vibrant in color, so I thought that they would be perfect for this project. So first things first, I got to work on the very front. I wanted to make sure that I used the whole spectrum of colors I had, so I planned to divide the colors out like this. To be more clear, this was more so the vision. At this point, I wasn't entirely sure how to incorporate the two purple shades. I thought about using them to adorn the shorts in purple stars like this, but ended up coming up with some other fun details to use them for later on in the whole process. That aside, I finally got around to the actual embroidery, starting with the light pink in the top right pocket. Do note that I'm using 2 strands of floss at a time for this. If you're newer to embroidery floss and are unsure of what that means, essentially every piece of embroidery floss is made up of several strands, usually 6. To achieve different widths of stitches, it's common for people to cut out a length of floss and then pull apart a certain amount of threads. In this case, I'm pulling out 2 threads to work with. Keep in mind though that when I thread the needle, I double up the length of the thread I'm using to tie a knot at the ends. This means that ultimately, each stitch will be made up of 4 strands of thread and will come out quite thin. Anyways, for the top of this pocket, I started by simply pulling the needle through the inner part through to the outer visible part of the fabric so that the knot gets hidden on the inside. Then I inserted the needle through the inside of the fabric again so that it entered and exited very closely to where the last stitch was made. For each stitch here, do notice that I'm only making one pass through the fabric, simply looping around and around this edge as I slowly fill in the color. When I got low on thread, I would insert my needle through the stitches I had already made on the inside of the pocket, as well as through a bit of the denim itself, and then tie a knot or two. Until I got low enough on thread that I couldn't make any more knots, I would just keep repeating this process. For any crocheters out there, this is pretty much just weaving in your ends. I kind of did a messy job on this light pink area specifically, but it'll be hidden on the inside anyway, so the security of the stitches is all that really matters to me. Next on the agenda is lining the rest of this tiny pocket with dark pink. Now, the way that I stitched this part is the way that I ended up stitching around most of the pockets. To keep it simple, I'll explain the basics of what I'm doing and then talk about the modification that I had to make for this dark pink pocket part specifically. So essentially, I started by inserting the needle from the very inside of the shorts to hide the knot, pulled the floss out to the outer visible side, then, using the pre-existing stitches here as a guide, I inserted the needle through the visible side of the fabric into the inside and pulled through. Then I continue the process by making the exact same stitch right below the finished one. Do note that when I finish a stitch on the right hand side of where I'm working, I start the next stitch on the right hand side as well. And if I end a stitch on the left hand side, then I start a new one on the left hand side. I'm doing this to save my thread and minimize the amount that will be left on the inside of the shorts. Now let's go back to the dark pink floss on this part of the pocket. I did mention that I had to make a slight modification for this part of the project specifically. This was because on the inside of the shorts where I needed to work, the lining of the pocket ended up being in my way, and there was seemingly no way to insert the needle through to the outside of the shorts without affecting the pocket itself. Because of this, I actually ended up taking my shorts, right side out, and inserting my needle into a lower part of the pocket that won't be visible when worn. From there, I made sure not to insert the needle all the way through to the inside of the shorts, but instead tried only to pierce through the denim layer. This is definitely a bit more advanced than just stitching through all of the layers in your way, but it's really worth it not to mess up the pocket. Anyways, this super simple stitch here is called a satin stitch, and it's really great for filling in areas with color. It's one of the most used stitches out there, and even if you didn't know the name, you've likely seen it across an incredible range of embroidered pieces. This is also the stitch that I used here to line the pocket right below with red and orange. Since I'm working over pockets here, I have to be super careful not to clip my needle through the lining of the pocket, which is why I kept checking my work, sometimes even after every stitch in tricky areas. If you do mess up and sew through the pocket, you have a few options for what to do. You can A. Attempt to gently undo the stitch that's clipped through the pocket lining. This is best if the stitch is very recent. B. Seam rip your work, or C. Live with it and keep going. I personally had to use a mix of options A and C throughout this project, so don't feel too down about it if it happens. Mistakes are just part of any craft, and this kind is usually reversible. The next thing of note I worked on here was the hole in the pocket. This is incredibly similar to the rest of what I've been doing, just spiced up a little bit. Like always, insert the needle from the inside of the fabric. Since this is in the pocket, I just pulled the needle from the inside of the pocket, not from the inside of the pant leg. Then pull through to the outside. From here, pull your needle and thread through the hole back into the inside. Be aware here that because there's still fine threads going across this hole, I had to try to stitch around them. Then insert the needle right next to where the last stitch was made and continue the process until you're finished with the area. Using a combination of these techniques, I went ahead and finished embroidering the majority of the front. Like I mentioned, I did hold off on adding any of the purple, but we will come back to that in a bit.
Turn it up, don't turn it off. Turn me round, put me in my place. From there, I can see it all. So beautiful, the Drop the needle down and dance me to the other side. And from there we can fly into the 80s. Brooklyn to
Next on the agenda was to embroider all around the pockets on the back. For this, I used the embroidery floss I was working with to come up with a plan for what colors I wanted to use and where. Somehow, though, you might notice that the red I ended up working with is actually a different shade from what I used on the front. I don't really know how that happened, but yeah. Anyways, the process of embroidering these pockets wasn't much different to what I did on the front. For the light pink, it's exactly the same thing as the original light pink segment. Just insert the needle from the inside of the pocket, loop the needle around to the back, and insert the needle right next to your last stitch. For the sides, where the orange, yellow, green, and blue are, I just inserted the needle from the inside of the shorts to the outside, and using the existing stitches here as a guide, inserted the needle back into the shorts, then made another stitch right next to my last. Using that same method, I kind of just free-handed these corners until they looked full enough. What's really rough about these back pockets in particular is that all of this embroidery has you going through several layers of denim fabric every time you make a stitch. This can make it difficult to both insert the needle and to pull it all the way through onto the opposite side of where you're coming from, which can be hard on both your needle and your hands. But yeah, I kind of just powered through on this part despite wanting to give in at several points. And bam, with the power of movie magic, the pockets practically completed themselves. Actually, though, embroidering all of this took me like 2 weeks in a needle sacrifice. You might notice that I left the hole on the left pocket unembroidered. Honestly, at this point, I wasn't quite sure what color to embroider it with, so I just decided to leave it for later. If you thought these shorts couldn't get any more colorful, just you wait, because now we're moving on to the side seams. My plan for this was to create a rainbow going down each side using the ever reliable satin stitch. I started off on the right hand side with the color light pink. After doing some math, I figured that I should average 2 inches for every color I wanted to add. Some colors came out longer and some shorter, of course, including the little bit of dark pink since I actually used up all of the floss that I had of it. This area here is actually pretty tricky to work with since the pocket's lining is in the way. But I found it was easiest to hold the lining in my left hand while I stitched with my right. That way I could feel what the needle was doing at all times and keep the pocket out of my way as best as I could. There's also this little rivet at the edge of both pockets here, which can make sewing around the area quite difficult. So I just did my best to avoid hitting the little metal bits inside the shorts. And this is what I ended up with. I did practically the same exact thing on the other side, except for the fact that I reversed the rainbow. There was already a lot of pink, red, yellow, and orange going on around this area, so I just wanted to create a bit of contrast by putting the darker colors on top. I actually love how the side seam came out too. Not only are the colors fun, but I think my work was a lot neater and my stitches more consistent. Here we are now, incredibly close to the finish line. All this pair of shorts needs is a few added details. It took me a while to figure out exactly what I wanted to do, but I ended up taking inspiration from the original pants I made yet again. Personally, my favorite part of the pants ended up being the artificial fraying I constructed over the holes in the leg. On a smaller scale, I thought that something like this, where the fraying was added over the empty space on the legs, would not only look cool, but also be a bit of a nod to the original design. In addition, I also thought it might be fun to use some of these letter beads I have to write out some simple words on the fake fraying. This led me to a mini side quest, however, because all of these beads smelled like beef bouillon. That's because I've kept them in this beef bouillon container for over a year. In an attempt to rid these beads of such a smell, I took them outside and let them sit in a mixture of tap water and scented hand soap for a little over 5 minutes, stirring occasionally. After letting them soak, I set them on a paper towel, wrapped them up, patted them dry, uncovered them, and then let them air out until they were completely dry. I was a bit skeptical if this would work or not, but luckily for me, my beads are now 100% beef scent free. Getting back on track, I took a look through all my beads and came up with a few keywords I thought went well with what I wanted these shorts to represent. which ended up being siren, pride, and love. I also considered peace and rainbow, but I didn't have enough letters for peace, and I just felt like rainbow would be too long. I set these aside in my workspace and got to work on preparing my thread. To start with this fake fraying, I focused my attention on this little empty space above the left pocket. Because I wanted my thread to be thicker than what I'd previously been working with, I used 4 strands out of the original 6 in the floss for these. It's been a while since I've made this fake fraying, and I made some weird choices in the stitching here, but you can see essentially I'm just making a plus sign, a loose stitch, and then one more plus sign. These little plus signs are important to have as they act as little anchors for the fake fraying. But I didn't stop there. I needed more details, more fake fraying, more beads. Thus, I moved on to filling the empty space of the front of the shorts. Now, the method for making the fake fraying here is the same as what I was doing, but I did use all 6 threads from the floss to achieve thicker stitches. To go into better detail, the process begins by inserting the needle from the inside of the shorts and pulling it through to the outside. Then, finishing the stitch by inserting the needle a little ways away and pulling through to the inside. You should have a straight line like this. Next, insert the needle below the middle of the first stitch, so about here. Pull through and then insert the needle above the middle of the first stitch and pull through. Now, you should have what resembles a plus sign, and your needle should be on the inside of your project. Keeping in line with the first stitch you made, skip over a little space and pull your needle through to the outside of the shorts. From here, you can play around with how long you want your fraying to be, but make sure to keep it loose enough that when your shorts are worn, they'll still have some drape to them. Once you've figured out where you want the fraying to end, insert the needle again and pull it to the back, or the inside. From here, you just have to make one more plus sign. If you want this plus sign to match the first one you made, make sure to start by making the line going sideways, and then finish by making the line going up and down. Then, flipping your shorts inside out, slip the needle through the stitches on the inside and tie a knot or two in order to secure your work. Do this as many times as you feel is necessary. After some time, this is how the front came out. And this is how the back came out. As you can see, I finally got around to embroidering around the hole on the pocket with dark purple as well. Personally, I really love the results, and I think the fake fraying really added that extra something needed to tie everything together. In their entirety, I think these shorts are just so fun, and the end result came out even cooler than I envisioned it would at the start. So yeah, that's everything for this video. I absolutely love hand embroidery. It's actually the first craft I ever really got into, and I would dare to even say that it's my favorite. So I'm really excited to be sharing this project. Even if you're not ready to pick up an embroidery project at the moment, I hope this video could help give you some creative inspiration. If you have been working on any fun projects, feel free to leave a comment on what you're creating down below. I always find it really interesting to hear what other crafters are working on. Anyways, thank you for watching, enjoy your summer, and have fun crafting.